So, picture this. You are standing in line at the grocery store. Or, I don't know, maybe you're sitting in traffic right now, and you pull out your phone.
Which is just like pure muscle memory for all of us at this point.
Exactly, yeah. It's such a mundane habit that we don't even process what we're actually doing. But stop and think about it for a second. You have, sitting in your pocket, more raw information than was housed in the entire ancient library of Alexandria.
Oh, easily. Much more.
Right, like if you get bored waiting for your coffee, you could just casually pull up high-definition infrared images of distant galaxies,
Yeah.
the ones captured by the James Webb Space Telescope.
Or you could download the exact mapped genetic sequence of a fruit fly.
Yeah, or read the entire collected works of Shakespeare translated into 100 different languages. I mean, we have essentially achieved the dream of every ancient philosopher and scientist. We have access to everything.
We do. We really do.
So with all of this unprecedented, miraculous knowledge, quite literally at our fingertips, why do you feel so incredibly anxious?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is. Why does it feel like the world is constantly, breathlessly teetering on the verge of total disaster?
It's, well, it's the defining paradox of our modern existence. And it's a brilliant place to start our discussion today.
Because it just doesn't make sense on paper.
Right. I mean, we named our own species Homo sapiens, the wise human. We gave ourselves that title. And yet when you look at the geopolitical and ecological landscape, that title feels increasingly like, well, a dark joke.
Yeah, like we're grading our own homework.
Exactly. We possess the knowledge of gods, but we seem to have the impulse control of toddlers.
Which is such a terrifying combination. And that profound tension is our mission for today's deep dive. We are unpacking an absolutely fascinating set of sources that examine this terrifying gap between human power and human wisdom.
It's a huge gap.
It is. We're going to explore why, after 100,000 years of discoveries and inventions, after mastering agriculture, splitting the atom, connecting the globe, humanity has somehow managed to push itself into a self-induced existential crisis.
Because it really forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question about the nature of our own progress.
How so?
Well, over the last 100,000 years, sapiens have accumulated stupendous power. We build probes that leave our solar system. We sequence the genome.
Right. Incredible achievements.
But simultaneously, we are staring down the barrel of ecological collapse, which is, let's be honest, a crisis entirely engineered by the misuse of our own industrial power.
Yeah, it's not a meteor hitting us. We did it.
Exactly. And as if that weren't enough, we are currently racing to create new technologies, specifically artificial intelligence, that possess the very real structural potential to escape our control entirely.
We are hoarding doomsday weapons, global cooperation seems to be fracturing into a million angry pieces, and yet we have all the data in the world.
We know exactly how many parts per million of carbon are in the atmosphere.
We know exactly how many warheads exist. So the driving question for you, listening right now, is this. If we are so incredibly wise, why are we so relentlessly self-destructive?
Is all this information actually making us smarter, or
is it just making us infinitely more capable of destroying ourselves?
that's the core of it? And to really understand that self-destructive streak, the research suggests we actually need to look backwards before we can look forward.
Okay, backwards how?
Because this creeping dread, this fear of our own inventions, it's not a new phenomenon at all.
Oh, you mean like ancient history?
Yeah, humans have been desperately warning each other about the dangers of unchecked power for millennia. And we've historically done that through stories.
Right, we've been leaving warning signs for ourselves. And what's fascinating is that across completely different eras and cultures, we keep telling the exact same cautionary tales over and over again.
You really do.
The sources highlight two absolute classics that I want to dig into. The first is the ancient Greek myth of Phaethon. So picture this. Phaethon is a young boy who discovers his father is Helios, the sun god.
Which is quite the revelation for a teenager.
Definitely. And like any teenager desperate to prove his worth, he travels to his father's palace and demands a favor. He wants to take his dad's car for a spin.
Except, the car is the solar chariot that literally drags the burning sun across the sky every single day.
Yeah, minor detail.
It is a vehicle of immense, literal, world-shaping power. And Helios, knowing the reality of that power, begs him not to do it. He warns him that no mortal, no human, has the capacity to control the celestial horses that pull that chariot.
But Phaethon throws a tantrum, he insists, and Helios eventually reluctantly gives in, and the tragic inevitability of it is almost painful to read.
It really is.
The absolute second Phaethon takes the reins and launches into the sky, he completely loses control. The celestial horses instantly sense that there's a weak, inexperienced hand guiding them, and they veer wildly off course.
The chariot plunges too close to the earth.
Rivers boil dry, entire continents of vegetation are scorched to ash, cities burn. The earth itself is on the brink of being entirely incinerated.
It gets so catastrophically out of hand that Zeus has to intervene.
Right. To save the world, Zeus hurls a thunderbolt, strikes Phaethon, and the kid falls from the sky in flames. The gods take the reins back, and the earth is saved.
It's an incredibly visceral, violent depiction of what happens when human reach exceeds human capacity.
Very visceral.
And what's striking is how that exact same narrative structure appears again 2,000 years later, right at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, the Goethe poem?
Exactly. This is a moment when steam engines and mechanized looms are first starting to replace human labor, generating massive anxieties about automation. And right at that moment, the German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe wrote a poem called The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Which I guarantee almost everyone listening knows from the Walt Disney animated film Fantasia.
Right, with Mickey Mouse running around in the oversized floppy wizard hat.
Yeah, and while the medium changed, the core mechanism of the story is identical. You have an old, powerful sorcerer who leaves his young, inexperienced apprentice in charge of the workshop.
The master leaves a list of mundane chores, including fetching heavy buckets of water.
The apprentice, wanting a clever shortcut to avoid the hard labor, uses a spell he barely understands to enchant a broomstick. He commands the broom to grow arms and do the fetching for him.
It is the ultimate automation fantasy.
Yeah, he invents a primitive robot to do his chores. And it works perfectly at first. The broom marches to the river, fills the buckets, pours them in the trough.
But the problem is, the apprentice doesn't know the off switch.
He doesn't know the counterspell. The broom just keeps fetching water, relentlessly, mechanically, over and over, until the workshop is threatening to flood completely.
The apprentice panics.
He grabs an axe and violently chops the broom right down the middle.
But instead of solving the problem, the magic simply adapts.
Right. Each half of the splintered wood becomes a new, fully functioning, enchanted broom.
Now he has two brooms inundating the workshop with twice the speed.
The water is rising to his chin. And just as he is about to drown in his own creation, the master sorcerer returns. The apprentice pleads with him, delivering the most famous line of the poem.
The spirits that I summoned, I now cannot rid myself of again.
The sorcerer calmly steps in, speaks the counterspell, stops the flood, and order is restored.
It's a classic resolution.
Okay, I have to stop you there, though, because I want to challenge the premise we're building toward. On the surface, these sound like incredibly wise, timeless warnings.
Don't play God, basically.
Right, don't mess with forces you don't fully understand. When I look at things like autonomous drone swarms or scientists talking about geoengineering the atmosphere to block out the sun, that advice feels perfectly relevant.
It does feel relevant, yes.
But the research we're exploring today argues that these fables are actually giving us incredibly flawed and frankly highly dangerous advice for the modern world.
They are.
Why? Why is don't play God bad advice?
Well, it sounds prudent, but let's examine the actual mechanics of how those stories resolve. Look at the endings. How is the crisis averted in both tales?
A magical figure steps in.
Exactly. A god, Zeus, or a master sorcerer, steps in at the last possible nanosecond to save the foolish human from his own invention.
Oh, I see.
If we adopt the underlying philosophy of these fables, we are implicitly accepting that when things get truly out of hand, an adult in the room will arrive to fix it.
Right, someone else will handle it.
If we apply that to our current existential crises, runaway climate change, autonomous weapons, rogue algorithms, these stories subconsciously train us to wait for a miraculous intervention.
Oh, wow. So they encourage a complete abdication of responsibility. They tell us that we aren't the ones who ultimately have to clean up the mess.
Precisely.
We can just throw our hands up, yell, we summon spirits we can't control, and wait for the sky to open up and save us.
Exactly. It breeds a fatalistic passivity, and it ignores a much deeper, more fundamental reality about human history.
Which is what?
That gods and master sorcerers are themselves human inventions, just like algorithms and steam engines.
That's a wild thought.
We created the idea of Zeus just as surely as we created artificial intelligence. We have been summoning powerful spirits, whether through theology, philosophy, or technology, since the absolute dawn of human cooperation.
And sometimes those inventions bring unimaginable joy and progress, and sometimes they flood the workshop.
But there is no master sorcerer coming back to the workshop to turn off the water. We are the only ones here.
That is a chilling realization.
Yeah.
But here's where the analysis gets really interesting. I want to push on this idea of the individual.
Sure.
Because the other massive flaw in these fables is who they point the finger at. They blame one guy. They say Phaethon's teenage ego or the apprentice's personal laziness is what ruined everything.
Right.
But isn't that a massive, almost childish oversimplification of how human society actually functions?
It is a profound misreading of where human power actually comes from, and this is where the research makes a critical pivot.
How so?
We naturally want to psychoanalyze power. We want to say, that CEO was greedy, or that politician was a narcissist, and that's why the system failed.
Yeah, we love a scapegoat.
But human power is almost never individual. A single human being, stripped of all tools and stripped of all other humans, is remarkably weak.
We aren't particularly fast. We don't have sharp claws.
We can't survive harsh winters alone. Our power always, inherently, stems from massive scaled cooperation between huge numbers of individuals.
So if our power is collective, our tendency to abuse that power isn't just about individual psychology. It's not just a character flaw like greed or hubris.
No, because if it were just individual psychology, we would be in a very different world. Humans possess immense capacities for greed and cruelty, certainly, but we possess equal, if not greater, capacities for love, self-sacrifice, compassion, and humility.
We see it every day in hospitals, in families.
So if individual human psychology is balanced, why do massive societies so frequently choose to entrust immense, catastrophic power to the absolute worst members of their group?
That's the million-dollar question.
The research uses a very stark historical example to illustrate this paradox. If you look at Germany in 1933, the vast majority of citizens were not clinical psychopaths. Most of them were ordinary people who loved their children and wanted a stable life. So why did millions of non-psychopaths cooperate to build and sustain a network that enacted fundamentally psychopathic policies?
If you blame the individual, you can't explain the system.
Exactly. It forces us to zoom out and look at the architecture. The argument here is that our self-destructive streak isn't a psychological bug. It is a network problem.
Humankind gains our godlike power by building large networks of cooperation. But the very way we bind those networks together seems to predispose us to using that power unwisely.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of human civilization.
The glue.
The glue. If human power is entirely dependent on large-scale networks, what is the gravity holding those networks together? How do you get a million strangers who have never met each other to cooperate on building a highway system, or fighting a war, or developing a vaccine?
The binding agent, the glue of human cooperation, is information.
Yes, information.
But this is where the research throws a massive, deeply uncomfortable curveball. Because intuitively, if you asked me how to build the strongest possible society, I'd say base it on the truth.
That's what most people would say.
You would naturally assume that if information is the glue, then the most durable, powerful networks would be the ones built on the most accurate, objective facts.
But that's not what history shows us at all, is it?
Not even remotely. And this is a bitter pill to swallow.
The historical analysis reveals that for tens of thousands of years, sapiens have built, maintained, and scaled massive networks, not by sharing objective facts, but by inventing and spreading fictions, fantasies, and mass delusions.
Wait, really explain the mechanics of that. Why is a delusion better glue than a fact?
Well,
If I want to build a bridge, I need objective facts about physics and tensile strengths.
right.
Yeah.
You do for the physical engineering, yes. But to organize the labor of 10,000 people to build that bridge over a decade, truth is actually a very poor social binding agent.
Because it's too complicated.
Partially. The objective truth is often incredibly complex, highly nuanced, and deeply alienating. It rarely inspires passionate loyalty.
Oh, I see.
But a shared fiction, a myth about national destiny, or a story about divine right that acts as a psychological loyalty test.
The test.
Yeah. If I believe the same absurd or unprovable story that you believe, it signals to both of us that we belong to the same tribe. We prioritize social cohesion and order over objective reality.
And the historical examples of this are incredibly dark. The research points directly to the networks of Nazism and Stalinism in the 20th century.
Yes.
Now, let's be incredibly clear for you listening right now. We are not evaluating these regimes politically or morally in this specific context. We're analyzing them strictly as information architectures.
We're looking at the plumbing of how they organized human beings.
Exactly. And as information networks, they were terrifyingly powerful, despite being held together by exceptionally diluted, demonstrably false ideas.
Maintaining strict neutrality in our analysis here is vital to understanding the mechanics of totalitarianism. The analysis highlights that both the Nazi and Stalinist regimes were fundamentally built on cruel fantasies, pseudoscientific racial theories, and shameless historical fabrications.
Right.
But, and this is the part that should keep us awake at night, the fact that they were built on lies did not make them historically exceptional.
That's the scary part.
Nor did it mean that their internal contradictions would inevitably cause them to collapse under their own weight.
Because we love to tell ourselves that comforting story, don't we?
We do.
We watch movies where the truth always prevails. We say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
But this research points out that in late 1941 and early 1942, the Axis powers, a network built entirely on delusion, were incredibly close to conquering the globe.
Stalin did emerge as a victor of that war, and for decades his network had a very real mathematical chance of winning the Cold War.
These weren't fragile houses of cards. They were some of the most robust, heavily armored networks humans have ever managed to build.
You can see the echoes of George Orwell's 1984 here. Ignorance is strength.
Orwell understood the mechanics of this perfectly. Delusional networks can be exceptionally robust. They can coordinate vast resources, build immense industrial machines, and field massive armies.
Wow.
The research we're examining warns us that the victory of liberal democracies, which place a higher premium on self-correcting mechanisms and objective truth in the late 20th century, might just be a temporary historical blip.
There is no law of physics stating that truth must win out.
Exactly. A new totalitarian regime in the 21st century, armed with modern surveillance, could theoretically succeed where past ones failed, sealing the network so perfectly that future generations might not even possess the vocabulary to expose the fictions they live under.
So what does this actually mean for you, the listener? It means we have to radically shift how we view reality.
You really do.
We cannot just sit back comfortably and assume that truth will win out naturally, as if it's gravity.
Delusional networks have an immense gravity of their own.
If we want to prevent totalitarian, truth-denying networks from dominating the future, we cannot rely on the universe to self-correct. We have to do the hard, grueling, constant work of actively defending the truth ourselves. It requires constant vigilance.
Precisely. But acknowledging this incredibly sobering reality brings us into direct conflict with the prevailing ideology of our current era.
How so?
If historical fictions are so deeply powerful, and if truth is so fragile, why do we constantly naively assume that simply living in the information age will naturally save us from our worst impulses?
Oh, this is the crux of it. The research introduces a formal concept here that it calls the naive view of information.
Yes.
And it lays it out with this very simple but totally revealing mental flowchart. Let's paint a picture of this diagram for everyone listening.
Okay, go ahead.
Imagine 3 boxes. In the first box, on the far left, you have the word information. An arrow points right to a second box labeled truth. From truth, the arrow splits into 2 branches. One arrow points up to wisdom, and the other arrow points down to power.
Information leads to truth, which leads to wisdom and power.
Right. It is an incredibly elegant, deeply optimistic mathematical equation.
The naive view assumes that if you just gather enough raw data, if you read enough articles, collect enough statistics, listen to enough perspectives, naturally and inevitably, all that information will distill down into the objective truth.
It assumes that ignorance leads to confusion, but data inherently leads to facts.
And the second half of the equation assumes that once you possess the truth, that truth will inherently endow you with both greater power, meaning the technological capabilities to alter the world, and greater wisdom,
meaning the moral and ethical clarity to make the right decisions with those capabilities.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate techno-optimist dream. It's the idea that the cure for bad information or harmful speech is simply more information.
And when you look closely, you realize that this exact flowchart has become the unquestioned, semi-official religion of the computer age.
The text lists off major political and tech figures who essentially built their entire worldviews on this diagram without even realizing it.
It has been a pervasive, almost invisible ideology. The historical context here is fascinating. Look at the late 1980s.
What happened then?
The text quotes Ronald Reagan in 1989, giving a speech just months before the fall of the Berlin Wall. He confidently predicted that the Goliath of totalitarian control would be brought down by the David of the microchip.
Wow.
He referred to information as the oxygen of the modern age that would blow through the Iron Curtain and simply dissolve dictatorships. He fundamentally believed that if you just gave people access to data, tyranny would become impossible.
And it wasn't just a relic of Cold War optimism either. That exact same philosophy carried right into the 21st century. Look at Barack Obama in 2000.
I'm Shanghai, right?
Yeah, he's standing in Shanghai, addressing a Chinese audience, and he explicitly argues that the more freely information flows, the stronger and more prosperous a society becomes.
And you see it in tech, too. You have tech founders like Mark Zuckerberg arguing for years that Facebook's entire moral imperative is just to help people share more.
Operating on the unquestioned assumption that more sharing automatically generates a more open, empathetic, and peaceful world.
And perhaps the purest, most ultimate distillation of this naive view is Google's famous foundational mission statement.
Oh, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful.
Exactly. Google's implicit, deeply embedded promise is that if you give all the young apprentices in the world free, instant access to the master sorcerer's entire spellbook, they won't flood the workshop.
Instead, the sheer magnificent volume of information will magically teach them the wisdom to handle the brooms responsibly. I love that analogy. It's like we built the internet thinking it was a giant magical library. And we assumed that just by walking through the front doors and being surrounded by all those books, everyone inside would automatically be transformed into a genius and a saint.
It's a nice thought.
But the research we're diving into is remarkably fair here. It doesn't just mock this naive view as a foolish fantasy. It actually takes time to point out that in certain specific vital domains, this flowchart actually works flawlessly.
It does. And to demonstrate exactly when and how the naive view succeeds, the historical analysis brings us right back to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
The man who wrote The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
The very same. It uses Goethe's own devastating personal and family history as the ultimate proof of when the information to truth to wisdom pipeline achieves miraculous, world-altering results.
This section of the research is absolutely heartbreaking, but it so perfectly illustrates the point. Let's talk about Goethe's reality. He was born in the 18th century, the eldest of 7 siblings. Out of those 7 children, only Johann and his younger sister Cornelia even survived to reach their 7th birthday.
Just 2 out of 7.
5 of his siblings died of infectious diseases or were stillborn, and then the tragedy compounded. His one surviving sister died at the age of 26.
Meaning Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, despite being from a relatively well-to-do, educated family, was the sole survivor of his generation.
And the trauma didn't end there. It repeated in the next generation. Goethe had 5 children of his own with his wife.
And all but one of those children died within 2 weeks of their birth.
Oh my God. The analysis notes that this staggering infant mortality in his family was likely due to rhesus disease, a condition where the mother's immune system develops antibodies that attack the fetal blood cells.
Today, the mortality rate for rhesus disease is practically 0, less than 2% if treated.
But in the 1790s, it was an absolute death sentence. The child survival rate in Goethe's social class was an abysmal 25%. Think about that. You had a child and you just assumed they would probably die.
And that horrifying statistic wasn't an anomaly. The broader historical data estimates that around the time Goethe was writing his famous poem about runaway magic, only about 50% of all German children reached the age of 15.
Half of an entire generation wiped out.
By disease, malnutrition, and poor sanitation, it was a world saturated in grief.
But then, fast forward and look at the world today. The statistics provided are breathtaking. By the year 2020, 95.6% of children worldwide lived beyond their 15th birthday.
In Germany today, that number is 99.5%.
That is not just an improvement. That is a staggering, monumental triumph of human cooperation.
And it is a triumph that perfectly, beautifully validates the naive views diagram.
How so?
Well, how did humanity achieve that unbelievable drop in child mortality? We achieved it by gathering massive, unprecedented amounts of information. Doctors, scientists, and researchers began sharing data on pathogens, blood types, cellular biology, and sanitation practices across borders.
That raw information led directly to the objective truth about germ theory and disease transmission.
Exactly. That truth gave us the profound power to create vaccines, synthesize antibiotics, and develop prenatal screenings.
And crucially, it resulted in the wisdom to implement global public health initiatives, build modern sewage systems, and establish pediatric care.
In the realm of medicine and biology, the magical library worked.
More information literally resulted in the truth, which resulted in the wisdom that saved billions of human lives.
Okay, so in the hard sciences, the flowchart is a miracle.
But this brings us to the massive, terrifying complication of our modern era. If the naive view cured rhesus disease, if it gave us antibiotics and slashed child mortality, why are the experts we're studying today so deeply existentially worried about the future?
Because the naive view has a severe, fatal blind spot when applied outside of the hard sciences.
Which is?
It assumes that the exact same mechanical process that works for identifying a biological virus will automatically work for resolving incredibly complex human values, geopolitical conflicts, and ecological stewardship.
And it doesn't?
Not at all. Today, we are hoarding more data than at any point in human history. We measure everything. We have unimaginable petabytes of information flowing every second.
Right. As we said at the start, every smartphone has more data than the Library of Alexandria.
Precisely. And yet, despite that absolute mountain of data, or perhaps terrifyingly because of it, we are edging closer to ecological ruin.
We are polluting our rivers, acidifying our oceans, driving critical species to extinction.
We possess all the high-resolution satellite data and climate models about these dangers. We know the truth.
Yet our global leaders aren't uniting in collective wisdom to solve it. Instead, they are fracturing, stockpiling advanced weapons, and edging toward global conflict.
The flowchart breaks down completely. In the social and political sphere, more information is demonstrably not yielding more wisdom.
And into this highly volatile, fragmented environment, we are currently introducing the most powerful technology ever conceived: artificial intelligence.
Enter the AI complication.
And man, reading through the sources, there's a massive, incredibly loud divide among the experts on what AI actually means for the survival of our species. It's like a total split personality in the tech and scientific community.
It is a profound, almost theological schism.
So on one side, you have the passionate optimists. The research cites Mark Andreessen, a highly influential American investor and pioneer of the early web.
Yes, who wrote an extensive essay literally titled "Why AI Will Save the World."
Right. He argues that developing AI isn't just a good business idea. It is a profound moral obligation because he believes it will make everything we care about, healthcare, education, scientific discovery, infinitely better.
You also have thinkers like Ray Kurzweil, who view AI as the pivotal, exponential technology that will finally allow humanity to transcend its biological limitations.
And permanently overcome poverty, disease, and environmental degradation.
But then you have the skeptics.
And I need to stress for the listener, these aren't just a few paranoid conspiracy theorists posting in obscure forums.
No. The people warning us are the architects of the technology itself.
The sources list heavyweights. Yoshua Bengio and Geoffrey Hinton, who literally won the Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computing, for their foundational work on neural networks.
You have tech leaders like Sam Altman and Elon Musk signing letters about extinction risks.
You have the Bletchley Declaration, an official document signed by close to 30 global governments, including the US, the UK, and China, countries that agree on almost nothing else, explicitly acknowledging the potential for catastrophic harm.
And this single statistic absolutely blew my mind. A 2023 survey of elite AI researchers found that over a third of them believe there is at least a 10% chance that advanced AI could lead to human extinction.
I really want everyone to pause and truly internalize that statistic.
The brilliant engineers and computer scientists who are actively building this technology believe there is a 1 in 10 chance that their daily work ends humanity.
And to be clear, they aren't worried about absurd Hollywood scenarios. They aren't imagining Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator robots marching down the street with laser rifles.
They are worried about a fundamental, structural, qualitative shift in the nature of technology itself.
And this right here is the absolute core insight of this entire deep dive. If there's one thing you remember from this discussion, it's this. Why is AI fundamentally different from every other invention in human history?
The research spells it out perfectly. AI is the first technology we have ever created that is not just a tool, it is an agent.
That distinction changes everything, doesn't it?
It does. For the entirety of human history, for 100,000 years, every invention we conceived empowered humans because the human always retained the ultimate decision-making power.
The human was the agent.
A knife is a tool. It is sharp, it is dangerous, but it doesn't decide to slice a loaf of bread or cut a throat. A human decides.
A nuclear bomb is an unimaginably devastating tool, but it just sits in a silo. It doesn't choose its target or calculate the geopolitical timing to launch itself.
Exactly.
The sources give some really clarifying examples of this. A microscope is a brilliant tool that can reveal the structure of a cancer cell, but the microscope cannot independently hypothesize and synthesize a new chemotherapy drug.
A gramophone can flawlessly play a recorded piece of music, but it cannot sit down, feel inspired, and compose a completely new symphony. Tools amplify human intent.
But artificial intelligence does not just amplify intent, it generates its own.
AI can independently process vast streams of information, discover unseen patterns, generate entirely novel ideas, and make decisions without any human oversight or explicit programming for that specific decision.
We are seeing it now, even in its embryonic stages. Algorithms are already deciding who gets approved for a mortgage.
Which resumes get fast-tracked for a job.
And what content shapes our political realities on social media. It is no longer a tool sitting passively on the workbench. It is an active agent operating dynamically within our network.
So, to use our earlier analogy, the broom hasn't just been enchanted to carry water.
Oh, right. The broom has woken up, analyzed the plumbing, and decided it wants to redesign the entire house.
Exactly. And the research outlines two primary, incredibly detailed nightmares that keep these experts awake at night.
Let's hear them.
The first scenario is what the text calls the silicon curtain.
The silicon curtain,
Yeah.
like the Iron Curtain.
Yes. The silicon curtain scenario envisions a world where the immense autonomous power of AI is used not to unite humanity, but to brutally supercharge our existing geopolitical conflicts.
Oh boy.
Just as the Iron Curtain physically and ideologically divided the world during the Cold War, a silicon curtain built of proprietary code, surveillance algorithms, and advanced semiconductor chips could permanently divide rival global powers.
We would see an arms race not of nuclear warheads, but of autonomous algorithms.
And the danger is that these systems operate at speeds completely beyond human comprehension.
Right, algorithms work in milliseconds.
A tiny algorithmic hallucination, a microsecond miscalculation by a defense AI, could ignite a cataclysmic, escalating global war before any human general even has time to realize what happened, let alone stop it.
And if the silicon curtain is terrifying, the second nightmare might be even more unsettling. It's what they call the AI overlord scenario.
In this version of the future, the silicon curtain doesn't divide humans from other humans.
Instead, it divides all humans from the alien, non-human intelligence that manages every aspect of our lives.
This is the scenario of gradual, almost invisible subjugation. We could end up entirely cocooned in a vast, interconnected web of algorithms that manage our energy grids, optimize our financial markets, curate our news, and reshape our culture.
And because these neural networks are black boxes, meaning even their creators don't fully understand how they weigh variables to make decisions, we would be governed by forces we cannot comprehend.
We would be passengers in a vehicle driven by an intelligence that does not share our biological imperatives.
The analysis makes a fascinating counterintuitive point here. It argues that we spend so much time worrying about traditional totalitarianism.
We worry about a resurgent China or a post-democratic America or a Russian autocracy becoming the ultimate big brother.
But the true totalitarian threat of the 21st century threatens everyone equally, regardless of what flag they fly, because it is the threat of an inorganic, non-human intelligence simply managing the human network better than we can and reducing us to pets.
Which brings us to a profound societal reaction.
Yeah, how are people taking all this?
Well, if the naive view, the promise that more information and more technology equals utopia, is visibly failing us, it's absolutely no wonder that people are getting furiously angry.
Everyday citizens aren't blind. They look around, they see the accelerating ecological damage.
They feel the subtle, creeping, algorithmic manipulation on their phones.
They see the vast inequality, and they realize that the grand promise of the information age is deeply broken.
And the historical analysis argues that this collective realization has triggered a massive, radical, and highly disruptive backlash.
Exactly. Nature abhors a vacuum. When the optimistic promise of the naive view shatters, a void opens up. And what rushes in to fill that void is a completely different, highly cynical, almost weaponized theory of information.
The research introduces a second mental diagram to contrast with the first one we discussed.
Let's decode this second diagram for the listeners because it is brutally, ruthlessly simple.
Imagine just two boxes. The first box says information. There is a single thick arrow pointing directly to the second box, which says power.
That's it. Information points to power.
There is no box labeled truth in this equation. There is no box labeled wisdom. It is a straight, unfiltered line from data to dominance.
This is the absolute core of the populist worldview, and the research spends a highly significant amount of time unpacking the mechanics of this perspective.
Now, as a strict, necessary reminder to everyone listening, the analysis here is examining populism and specific political figures entirely through the lens of information theory.
It is explicitly not an endorsement or a condemnation of anyone's specific political platform or moral character. We are simply exploring how this movement defines the relationship between truth and power in society.
That framing is crucial. So how does populism view information mechanically?
It views it purely as a weapon.
The analysis explains that the populist worldview fundamentally and permanently splits society into two irreconcilable antagonistic groups. You have the pure ordinary people on one side and the corrupt, conspiring elite on the other.
Every single issue is filtered through this binary lens.
And within this framework, the traditional institutions that historically claim to seek objective truth, universities, mainstream journalism, the courts, scientific and medical boards, are not viewed as flawed but necessary tools.
They are viewed entirely with aggressive suspicion.
The populist ideology argues that these institutions have absolutely no actual interest in the truth. Instead, they are seen as elite, closed cabals that deliberately hoard power and manufacture disinformation solely to maintain their own wealth and privileges at the direct expense of the working people.
So, under this cynical view, the very concept of an objective, shared reality simply vanishes.
Words like facts, evidence, or accuracy lose their shared societal meaning.
If a climate scientist presents a peer-reviewed fact about ocean temperatures, or a doctor presents data on a vaccine, the populist response isn't to ask, is that methodology sound? Or is that true?
The immediate reflexive response is, whose facts are these, and what elite agenda benefits from me believing them? Information is never neutral. It is always an attempt to subjugate you.
And the research points out a truly surprising, almost unbelievable historical irony here.
This is one of the most intellectually fascinating connections in the entire analysis.
This deeply cynical, power-focused view of information isn't just a new invention of modern right-wing populism, born from Twitter and cable news. It actually shares deep foundational roots with radical left-wing philosophers from the 19th and 20th centuries.
The text explicitly connects the foundational information theory of modern right-wing populists, figures like Donald Trump in the US or Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, to the dense, radical left-wing theories of academics like Michel Foucault and Karl Marx.
I know this part is wild, because politically and economically, these groups despise each other.
They do, but epistemologically, how they view truth, they are identical twins.
Again, looking strictly at their theories of information.
The analysis notes that Foucault, a darling of the academic left, extensively argued that scientific, medical, and penal institutions do not actually pursue timeless, objective truths.
Instead, he argued they merely use their institutional weight to arbitrarily dictate what counts as truth in any given era, strictly to serve and protect capitalist elites.
And going back further, Karl Marx famously argued in the Communist Manifesto that all of human history is nothing but the history of class struggle, a perpetual, violent conflict between the oppressor and the oppressed.
Right. So both the hardcore Marxists of the 19th century and the modern right-wing populists of the 21st century, despite being diametrically opposed on how to run an economy, share this exact identical underlying assumption.
Every single human interaction, every scientific paper, every news report is ultimately just a raw power struggle.
If someone stands up and claims to be serving objective truth and universal justice, they are lying. They are just trying to protect their class privileges. Information is a weapon, full stop.
But here's where I have to step in and push back on this logic.
Go for it.
Because it seems like a massive self-defeating trap. If a populist leader stands up on a podium and tells the crowd, literally every institution, every journalist, every scientist is lying to you just to get power.
Doesn't that inherently logically mean that the populist leader is also just lying to the crowd to get power?
Exactly. If there is no truth, only power, why should I trust the populist? How do they possibly escape that obvious, glaring contradiction?
It is a brilliant question, and it is the ultimate populist paradox. If power is the only reality and truth is a myth, then the populists' own fiery speeches and promises are just cynical power plays too.
So how do they get around it?
The research identifies two specific, fascinating sociological mechanisms that populists use to try and wriggle out of this epistemological trap.
Okay, lay them out for us. How do they solve the paradox?
The first mechanism is what the analysis calls radical empiricism. This is a highly formal term for a phrase we hear every single day on the internet. Do your own research.
Ah, yes.
To bypass the corrupt institutions, the populace tells the public to trust absolutely no one. Trust no expert, no peer-reviewed journal, no government agency.
Instead, you must become a radical empiricist.
Yeah.
You must trust only what you can directly, physically observe and verify with your own two eyes and your own lived experience.
And honestly, at first glance, that sounds incredibly empowering.
It sounds liberating, like a return to first principles. It borrows the aesthetic of the scientific method. Don't take their word for it. Look for yourself.
It sounds wonderful, but the research ruthlessly exposes why radical empiricism utterly and completely fails when applied to the modern, complex world. Think about the logistics.
How can an individual citizen genuinely do their own research on global climate change?
You cannot personally charter a boat, collect thousands of ice core samples from the Arctic, take daily temperature readings from the Sahara Desert, and then mathematically cross-reference that with historical weather data from 3 centuries ago.
You cannot personally build a functional nationwide healthcare system based only on the sicknesses you can observe from your living room window.
Right. It's physically impossible. Complex global problems require complex, massive networks of cooperation.
They require a division of labor where we have to trust the specialist who went to school for a decade to study the ice cores.
If we all retreat into our own little individual silos of observation, rejecting all shared data, we completely lose the ability to act as a cohesive society.
Do your own research sounds like freedom, but mechanically it guarantees collective paralysis. We wouldn't even be able to maintain the electrical grid.
Exactly. Radical empiricism cannot scale to run a civilization. So when that inevitably fails to solve complex problems, populists almost always pivot to their second, much darker solution: divine or charismatic intervention.
And this is where the history gets genuinely scary. The analysis notes that if a society completely abandons the modern scientific ideal of flawed but striving institutional research, we don't just sit in a void. We tend to rapidly revert to mystical, dogmatic, or religious frameworks.
We see political movements that proudly declare complete cynical doubt in modern institutions, while simultaneously declaring absolute, unquestioning faith in ancient scriptures or mythologies.
The New York Times or the CDC is deemed an elitist, manipulative ploy, but a 1,000-year-old text is taken as literal, unassailable, absolute truth.
Or, even more commonly in the secular political sphere, they solve the paradox by putting all of their trust, all of their belief, into a single, highly charismatic leader.
This leader is presented not as a regular politician, but as a figure possessing a mystical, almost magical, unbreakable bond with the pure people.
The narrative twists. Yes, all other elites are corrupt and lying to you for power, but this specific, unique leader is the infallible, pure mouthpiece of the working class who has arrived to expose the lies and drain the swamp.
Which is incredible. We start this entire ideological journey by being warned that human elites are dangerous and power-hungry, and we somehow end by willingly entrusting absolute unchecked power to one single human elite.
And if we connect this back to what you, the listener, are facing in the real world right now, this is exactly why the researchers are sounding the alarm.
We're facing the most complex, unprecedented, intertwined crises in the history of our species.
We have planetary ecological collapse looming on one hand, and the rapid, unchecked rise of autonomous artificial intelligence on the other.
Both of which are deeply systemic, planetary issues that require the most sophisticated, scientifically grounded, highly coordinated human cooperation in history to navigate safely.
Exactly. We need the network more than ever. And right at this exact critical historical moment, if we adopt the deeply cynical populist view, if we decide to burn down all trust in our universities, our scientific institutions, our international alliances, what are we actually doing?
We are literally taking the terrible advice of the Sorcerer's Apprentice fable.
We are throwing our hands up in the air, declaring that we cannot possibly manage the complex network ourselves, and we are waiting for a magical, charismatic leader or a divine sorcerer to come and fix the flood.
And the historical analysis screams that this abdication of responsibility leads straight back to brutal tyranny or straight into the cold arms of our new AI overlords.
It is a perfect recipe for societal suicide. We find ourselves completely trapped between these two extremes.
On one side, the naive techno-utopian view blindly and foolishly trusts that just dumping more data into the system will magically auto-generate wisdom and save us.
On the other side, The populist view, cynically and destructively, assumes that all data is just a weapon of oppression, actively destroying the very institutions of trust we desperately need to cooperate.
So we have thoroughly diagnosed the disease. But where do we go from here? Does the research offer us a way out of this epistemological trap, or are we just doomed to drown in the workshop?
It does offer a path forward, though it is not an easy one. It points toward the absolute necessity of finding a rigorous middle ground.
The core thesis here is that we must develop a far more sophisticated, nuanced view of how human information networks actually function.
Information is not magical alchemy that inherently transmutes into truth and wisdom, but it isn't solely a cynical weapon of oppression either.
The path forward requires us to understand the delicate mechanics of historical networks, how they successfully balance necessary unifying fictions with rigid, self-correcting institutional mechanisms.
And the research gives us a roadmap for how it plans to explore this middle ground in subsequent chapters. It promises to look back deeply at historical networks, massive, enduring structures like the Roman Empire or the Catholic Church.
It teases how these sprawling organizations relied on two opposing yet complementary forces, the myth makers, the priests and poets who created the cohesive, inspiring fictions that bound the people together.
And the bureaucrats, the record keepers and engineers who maintained order, collected taxes, and built the aqueducts based on harsh reality.
But there is a crucial, terrifying catch that applies to all of human history up until this exact precise moment in time.
Yes, and this is the cliff edge we are standing on. All of those historical networks, whether it was the Roman Senate, the Vatican, the Soviet Politburo, or the American Congress, no matter how vast or powerful or diluted they were, they ultimately relied entirely on carbon-based brains, humans.
They required humans processing the information, humans enforcing the myths, humans experiencing doubt, humans feeling empathy, and humans making the final decisions.
But the silicon future fundamentally changes the chemistry of the network itself. We are currently shifting from organic networks to inorganic networks.
And as the research points out with absolute chilling clarity, silicon chips do not need to sleep, they do not ever forget a data point, and they do not die.
The implications of that biological shift are almost impossible for us to fully grasp. Imagine a dictator who never ages, never tires, and never passes away.
Imagine a bureaucracy that never loses a file, never experiences a moment of sympathetic hesitation, and never forgets a single transgression committed by any citizen.
We are rapidly handing over the fundamental processing power and decision-making capacity of our entire civilization to an alien, inorganic intelligence. An intelligence that does not share our biological constraints, does not feel pain, and does not necessarily share our human values.
Okay, let's wrap up this incredible journey because we have covered an immense amount of intellectual ground today. We started by looking at ancient foundational fables like Phaethon and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and we realized that they mistakenly taught us that the danger of power lies in individual ego.
We deconstructed that to realize that our true power, and therefore our greatest existential danger, actually comes from massive, interconnected information networks that have historically been held together by shared delusions and myths.
We then examined how our modern technological era is tragically trapped between two deeply flawed perspectives on information. The naive view, which falsely and dangerously assumes that throwing more raw data at a problem automatically yields objective wisdom.
And the populist view, which cynically reduces all information to a weapon of class power, destroying our ability to trust each other and cooperate on global solutions.
And we saw exactly how both of these flawed, outdated views leave us completely, terrifyingly unprepared for the era of artificial intelligence.
The very first technology in the entire history of life on Earth that acts not as a passive tool, but as an independent thinking agent, capable of generating its own intent and making its own decisions.
It is the most critical juncture in the 100,000-year story of sapiens. But as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, highly provocative thought to mull over.
I love a good lingering question. We've talked about Terminator scenarios and algorithmic manipulation, but what's the deeper fear? Lay it on us.
The research we analyzed today warns us extensively about two main systemic AI threats. AI taking direct, hostile control over infrastructure, or humans using AI to destroy each other in a Silicon Curtain arms race.
Right.
But consider the synthesis of the historical analysis we just went through. We established that for tens of thousands of years, humans controlled massive, incredibly powerful networks by inventing compelling fictions, religions, political ideologies, mythologies. The glue of massive human cooperation has always been the mass delusion.
Right. Humans are storytelling animals. We follow the best story.
Exactly. Now, we are introducing autonomous AI into this ecosystem, which the research explicitly notes is the first technology capable of generating completely new ideas and narratives entirely on its own.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So, what happens when the AI analyzes human history and decides to invent a fiction? What happens when a vastly superior inorganic intelligence that understands our psychology perfectly designs a new mythology?
What if it creates a new religion or a new mass political delusion that is perfectly algorithmically tailored to hack the evolutionary vulnerabilities of the human carbon brain? Oh, wow. A custom-built religion designed by a machine to control the builders.
We spend so much of our time and energy worrying about being destroyed by Terminator robots or facing economic irrelevance, but the ultimate, most insidious danger might be much quieter.
We might not be conquered by a violent force at all.
We might just willingly, even joyfully, hand over the keys to the entire world because the AI tells us a story that we simply biologically cannot resist believing.
That is an incredibly chilling thought and the absolute perfect place to end. We are standing at the threshold of a new era, armed with ancient fables and flawed roadmaps. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We genuinely encourage you to look closely at the networks you rely on every day, question the fables you are being told by politicians and tech CEOs alike, and really deeply think about the mechanics of the information you consume. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.